Hey everybody, so this is my presentation on Maria Montessori for our choice of a Catholic educator for CHRTC. So Maria Montessori is actually pretty well known. Most of us, especially those of us in education, have probably heard of her. She was really impactful and revolutionary in the world of education, especially in early childhood development. But she also had some pretty interesting contributions to religious education, especially for young children. So that's kind of what we'll be exploring here. Just to start with her life a little bit, she did start as a graduated physician. I'll come back to that quote in a moment. She, in 1896, was Italy's first female physician, which is pretty cool. Though because of this, her faith was challenged through the aspect of science. She worked with everyday things that were very factual and concrete and mythological, pardon me. And so faith is very almost abstract, and so because of that she struggled with her faith. And we see that jump and that change through a few different points in time. She was also a caregiver, so to speak, for a little while. She worked with children with learning disabilities, mental and physical disabilities, and she started working with them on a daily basis, learning to teach them so that when other people didn't want to. And this is where her observation of children really began. Then in 1807, she actually opened her first children's house. She started with 15 kids and began educating them in the way she believed was in the best interest of the children. This is really that idea of the Montessori method, where children are sort of masters of their own education. They can guide their own learning when given proper instruction, and they know more and are capable of doing more than we may perhaps realize. So back to this quote, Montessori said, "The goal of early childhood education should be to activate the child's own natural desire to learn." And this is not only present in her overall general idea of education, but also in her idea of religious education, which we will see. So her views on religious education, she had quite a few, though her work with religious education isn't as well known. She wasn't a super heavy influential figure in this area, but she did have a few interesting points that were sort of adopted. So firstly, she believed it's more important when and how we teach religious education rather than what we're teaching. So she believed that that emphasis should be on, for example, for when teaching at all ages, being aware of a child's developmental stage and curating the education for that level of learning. She believed even babies were absorbing the Mass and that children should not be separated from their families during church, that they needed to be there and participating in the ways that they knew how. For example, lighting candles or helping with offertory, even just singing is all ways that children can participate in the Mass. They will still learn the content of religious education. However, it's more important in how and when we teach it, because if those two fail and they weren't being taught at the right time, it doesn't matter what we're teaching, the child will not absorb it. She also believed in hands-on learning, and something she did that was really cool was her process of teaching about the Eucharist. And so in her children's home, she was getting the children to help plant the seeds for vineyards and wheat fields, and then the children would care for them and would eventually harvest them and send them away to be prepared, and then would receive the ingredients back to be able to make the Eucharist and the wine for the whole body and blood of Christ. So this is a very interesting concept where children are, again, hands-on learning so that they can learn in the best way possible. And then she also projected this idea that the child is capable. It doesn't really matter what age they're at, especially when they're young. They're very capable of learning and participating. So she believed the child's participation in the Sunday liturgy should be free from adult-directed instruction, because such overbearing layers of command thwarted the child's potential to participate fully as a child in the liturgical rites. Meaning that children are children, and we need to allow children to be children. We don't want to force adult perspectives on them when they're not ready to learn those. And she found that's what a lot of the church was doing. She really wanted the faith to be accessible to children. So she wrote a few different things on religion. The first thing that was the Montessori method, and she kind of developed several versions of this. She was actually received a papal blessing when she visited Rome, and her work was blessed by Pope Benedict XV. And by her third sort of version of the Montessori method, she included a chapter on religious education. We did see later that she kind of dropped Catholicism for a while. There was a lot of controversy within the church in her ways. She was viewed as very liberal. So the papal blessing did help with this a little bit, but people were still kind of questioning her methods and intents, and it got very difficult for her. And so she almost felt like abandoning the faith. I think we've all been there at one point. But she did kind of later return and had a resurgence of faith. And at that time, she wrote Life of Christ and the Mass Explained to Children, which kind of goes back to the idea of when we're teaching it, how we're teaching it, and it needs to be accessible to the age group that is learning. And then though she didn't write extensively on religious education, she did inspire others. Sophia Cavalletti, who's also a religious educator, she was heavily inspired by Montessori's method, and that really created a ripple and inspired her to write the Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, which was based on Montessori's method and kind of explains a catechesis for children in the Mass. It's much more comprehensive than anything Montessori had sort of done, but yeah, Montessori kind of created this ripple effect, and other people started writing and implementing her methods in religious education rather than her doing a whole lot to implement the Montessori method directly into religious education. So there's a lot of byproducts from what she had developed. So as I had mentioned before, there was a lot of controversy with the church. That papal blessing in 1918 by Pope Benedict XV, it was encouraging for her and others who shared her view on education, because as mentioned, she was viewed as much more liberal. And this was often because of the idea that her system opposed what the church was traditionally teaching, which was that the church and the family will build the child rather than the child being able to build his or her own self, of course, with support. And this was really what she was projecting, is that the child is capable. She also believed that, for example, religion doesn't need to be taught or instilled. It's kind of faith is within us, and at one point or another, we'll all gravitate towards seeking something of that sort. She just wanted to slowly cultivate that within the child rather than feeling like she was perhaps indoctrinating them. There were lots of challenges because the papal blessing did not end them. In 1929, the papal encyclical opposed the fact that she educated male and female children together. So this stems from very much older, again, we're in Europe here, so this is very traditional ways of doing things that was men and women were learning separately. She believed that there was something to be learned, that men could learn from women and women could learn from men, especially among children, and that they needed to be together to learn from each other, to learn how to best work together and cooperate in an adult world. And then, pardon me, some acceptance. Yeah, certain parts of Montessori's methods were actually implemented by the church, such as child-sized pieces and tools to teach religion. That was something Montessori had said, was always child-sized objects for their learning, to encourage them. We don't want it to feel very daunting, so something that's accessible and relatable to them will always help. And the church also wanted to make the faith more accessible and relatable to children. However, they just didn't want to use the Montessori method. They wanted to do it their own way. And then for a symbol to sort of represent Montessori's methods and teaching, both in education and especially religious education, I kind of chose a Rubik's Cube, because we see that it's multidimensional, it has uniformity, and it also has a purpose. So like Montessori's method, a Rubik's Cube has multiple sides, each with its own color. This is symbolic of Montessori's multidimensional approach to children's education, encompassing many different aspects. She wrote on different topics. She even at one point kind of explored Buddhism and I believe Hinduism as well. because this idea of faith and religion to her was still so concrete within her, and she was wanting to see how other religions, for example, were approaching religious education and how she could apply that to Catholicism. So it's very multidimensional. However, there's still uniformity. While there's various colors to Rubik's Cube, they must each come together after being mixed up in order for the puzzle to be complete. This relates how Montessori's varied impacts and aspects on education all work together to best serve the child. So even though there's a lot of these different aspects and all these different parts to it, it all comes together very simply in that the child is capable. Things must be simple for them to learn, and they will learn, and they will have an interest in it. And lastly, there's a purpose. A Rubik's Cube has a purpose. It's not mixed up and jumbled up for nothing, and encourages critical thinking as well as problem solving. And these aspects are found to be prominent in Montessori's approach to education, where children are sort of allowed to be on their own with support, of course, in the room, but they're allowed to be on their own to develop critical thinking and problem solving and to have hands-on learning. And that's really kind of what a Rubik's Cube is. It's hands-on learning. It's a puzzle and it's something that's fun. And it relates to child's play, which is kind of as well what's related to Montessori's method. So yeah, the Rubik's Cube is a symbol that I would use to describe Montessori's method. These are just my resources. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation, and I hope you learned something. Thanks.